I appreciate everybody for tuning in. All right, we got an informative live stream going today. Almost the Green Acre. How you doing? I got my couple notes here just to make sure I don't miss any topics. But I'm going to go through a few things and I'll stop for questions in between certain topics. So this is based around compost. The Oxford Google definition is decayed organic material used as plant fertilizer. Because I get that question a lot. People like to ask me, what do I use as fertilizer? I like to use what's around me. If I pan around a little bit, you see like a lot of weeds, you see a lot of nature, you see a lot of stuff around me, and nature is my fertilizer. In the forest, for example, is an abundance of things growing, trees, bushes, plants, so many things going on, mushrooms breaking things down, and there is nobody going to the forest to fertilize anything out there. So the forest naturally kind of gardens itself. Nature kind of gardens in a regenerative way, and that's kind of where we need to get back to regarding the way farms kind of destroy land, and we just need to get back to the regenerative way of gardening, and that's giving back to the soil, giving back to the land that you want to take from. So if you give back, you get back in abundance. I mean, that concept is everywhere in humanity. You give in order to receive. Nature provides everything that we actually need to garden. So we just kind of go in line with nature and kind of just be more in tune with it. As far as compost, and like the easy way to look at it, to think about it as carbon versus nitrogen, or carbon as in brown material, things that's kind of depleted of life and moisture. And then you have the green material, which is not always green because it can come in the form of watermelon rinds, leftover orange peels, apple skins, whatever it may be, grass, green leaves. Some leaves aren't, all leaves aren't green. Some are red, orange, whatever the case may be. But if it still has moisture in it, it still looks like it's not completely depleted of life, then you can kind of put that on the green side. So the green meaning it still has moisture, it hasn't been depleted of life and everything. And then the brown, which is like decayed all the way and it's dead. So if it looks dead, carbon. If it looks like it still has moisture and it hasn't fully dried out and it still has life to it, then we're talking about the nitrogen side. Does anybody have any questions about anything so far? Thus far, I think I'm pretty clear in that. Let's see. Nature has the best fertilizer for sure, definitely. I like to garden in a natural way. I've bought fertilizer before and I couldn't bring myself to actually use it. I'm more of a garden purist. So I garden in the way that nature intends. In the forest, there's nobody giving a little boost to nature, like, here, take this plant fertilizer. They're going to the store and fertilizing the trees or shrubs. Nobody's doing that. Nature grows beautifully on its own. Let's get into the nitrogen side again. So fresh leaves, greens, organic material, the fresher it is, the more nitrogen side it is. With the carbon, like I said, dead material, and that could be in the form of sticks, branches, leaves, anything that looks just dead and depleted of moisture. Somebody asked me the question about cardboard. If it's not coated with plastic, because they have like the plastic coated cardboard, I like to stay away from that. And if it has ink in it, some people may use it, some people don't like to use it. There's no ink in nature. That's a man-made thing. And I like to stay away from cardboard that has ink in it. So if it's just plain brown cardboard, you can put that in your compost. It's best to cut that up and then you can add that in if you're at a loss for carbon. Does it matter to you weeds with seeds in it? Okay, I'll get to that. And yes, it does and it doesn't. Do you collect and keep the browns and greens in certain areas? Or is it just a chop and drop type of season? So in some areas, I do just a chop and drop, but some areas, sometimes I'll take the weeds because I know I want to put them in my compost, because I have a long-term compost pile that I'm building up for spring. So I'm not out here turning it every day. I'm not putting too much into it. When I put it in the compost pile, I mix in the proper ratio of carbon and nitrogen, and I just let that sit, and it'll break down on its own. So I'm not out here turning it every few days. I'm not out here putting water in it every day or every other day. I'm letting nature do what it does. And by spring, it's ready to go. I do cut down things and I do chop and drop in certain areas, but when those areas are good and they need to break down, and I just cut down weeds and they're still nitrogen heavy, I wait for fall. And then once that carbon starts coming in, once a lot of leaves start falling from the trees, a lot of the grass starts dying off, I collect that material and then lay that on top of the stuff that was more nitrogen heavy then, which it'll start to die and but the carbon doesn't necessarily need the nitrogen in order to create a real fertile growing medium. The carbon itself will do it on its own, especially the leaves. The leaves can and will break down on their own and create a nutrient rich growing medium and kind of make the soil healthy and create more of a mulch on top of the soil. The nitrogen will definitely help, and it'll help break down everything, and it'll just add more nutrients into the soil. But the carbon will break down on its own. A lot of inks are so soy based. Yes, I'm not too big on those. Hello from Jersey. Yes, I'm in New Jersey. Okay. All right. So biochar. So like if you're somebody who you cook outside, for example, you're cooking with wood burning stove, or you like to smoke things, that biochar, or just things there was like a fire somewhere and a lot of that natural organic material burnt. Yes, you can use that material and put it either in your compost or in directly into your soil. But for me, I love to add it to my compost. It really activates my compost if I'm making an active compost bin, which I have a long-term compost, which is not really too active most of the time, unless I added something in and then it activates, heats up, and then cools down. But my active compost, which I'm making compost during the growing season, and I'm turning it often. I'm adding water into it, and it's primarily made of leaves and grass and just things that are just finely broken up, and I can add it right in. So if I have some weeds, and I'll show you that in a minute. So I put weeds on my tarp. So I'll pull weeds out the ground, lay them on my tarp, and let the sun just bake them to death. And I mean to death, because they dry out so much that the weeds die all the way to their root. I don't add weeds to my compost pile while they're still alive, because they get mixed in there and the weeds will survive. And I'm not trying to create a breeding ground for my weeds. So I like to let them bake on that tarp right there, and they will die. And then I put them into a ball or put them into a pile, a heap, and I run them over with my lawnmower. Just run them over, obliterate them. And then I add them into my compost pile, because they break down a lot easier the more broken down the material. But as far as getting back on topic to the biochar, this is one topic that I actually just looked up just to make sure that I can provide for you some knowledgeable material. And the biochar, as far as being nutrient and water retention, improves your soil structure. And soil structure is important, and which is why I'm not doing any more tilling. So I'm building all no dig beds from here on out. And that's just the way nature intends. Nature does not till. All right. In the forest, there's nobody out there digging things up from the soil. So the soil structure stays intact. Everything is amazingly constructed, and everything gets watered to where it needs to go. Nature is just so complex and amazing that we just don't want to mess with that. Help mitigate heavy metal toxicity in your soil. So, I mean, that sounds important, right? All right. It can help neutralize soil acidity. So that's one thing that I kind of battle with, but it's not a huge battle, but it's something that I deal with because I grow in a lot of wood chips now. So I grow in a lot of arborist mulch that has been breaking down for at least 4 years now, 4 to 5 years. And wood chips is very acidic. Now over time, because they're arborist mulch and wood chips that were broken down with leaves, that stuff that had nitrogen in it. So it broke down and it kind of made itself its own compost, which is why I'm able to grow in it. So a lot of microorganisms came in to break that stuff down. And if I go through it now, which I can show you a handful of it, yeah, the microorganisms came in and just broke that stuff down, and it's now sitting there. And during the growing season, a lot of stuff is just growing in it now. Like stuff that I didn't plant. Now it's not veggies. There's a lot of weeds and stuff that I didn't put there, but it's almost like soil-like. It doesn't look like big chunks of wood chips like it used to. Try to bring it a little closer, and that stuff is very fine. So I grow directly in that, and I've made videos where you can see lettuce growing in it, kale growing in it, peppers growing in it. I currently have broccoli growing in it, cabbage, cauliflower. I have a lot of things growing directly in my arborist mulch. So it's not as acidic as it was from the very beginning. But yes, the biochar can help neutralize the acidity in your growing medium, especially if it's very acidic. And for the plants, the stuff that's not going to be more perennials, you kind of want more of a less acidic soil. All right. And it can also help break down agricultural waste, which is pretty much saying compost. And then litter, it can help decompose litter. So chicken waste, if you have certain animals that don't eat meat and you use like cow manure, chicken waste, that biochar can help break that stuff down too. So, all right, that 3-to-1 rule. So yes, that's a general rule of thumb, 3-to-1, 3 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen. All right. And it's not an all-encompassing rule. And I want to be clear in that that's just a general rule of thumb for everyday things like grass, weeds, leaves. So when you start getting into things that are more dense in material, so let me see if I can. So let's say you have a twig here and you have grass. The amount, that 3-to-1 rule does not apply for things that are just more denser in material. Like this is going to take longer to break down than a blade of grass. It's not the same. You see that right there? There's a big difference in this than in this. This I can easily rip apart, pull that, and it breaks apart. This right here, I try to pull that apart, it doesn't. It's very dense. So you have to increase dramatically the amount of nitrogen that you add when you start getting into way more denser material. So with things like this right here, wood chips, twigs, just kind of make that more of like a tenfold rule and just go with a 30-to-1 ratio as far as carbon to nitrogen. So for every 1 part of carbon, you add 30 parts nitrogen. I'll say that again. For every 1 part carbon, for this denser material, you add 30 parts nitrogen. So you're allowed to add a lot more nitrogen than you would have before. All right. Any questions so far? Is there an expiration time on compost? No. No. I mean, I wouldn't let your compost pile just sit there for years and just not do anything with it, because you'll have things start to grow from it. It is a growing medium. And I actually, now that I'm on that topic, I kind of want to show you. Let's see if I'm going to take this camera off of here real fast, real quick. I'll put it back. And I want to show you that if you leave your compost, what will happen? Yo, you see all those volunteers right there? Those are all like melons right here. These are tomatoes. There's a ton of tomatoes. There's some lettuce growing in here. More either melons or some type of gourds. So maybe squash or some type of melons. But there's a ton, probably hundreds of volunteers growing there. And this is from a couple weeks. So if you leave your compost pile, things will start to grow. So from if you have seeds in it or seeds that are flying in the air from weeds, because weed seeds do fly. Let's not get lost on the fact that weed seeds are always flying in the air. Wherever there's weeds growing, they fly, they catch wind, and they can land up in your compost pile. That's why it's a good idea to cover your compost pile. So I'm not going to say your compost will expire. It's not going to expire. It may deplete in nutrients over time. And things, the rain carries nutrients down into the ground, and things grow from it. So when things grow from it, and it takes nutrients for them to grow, so they start sucking up those nutrients for plants to grow that are growing from your compost. So it's not a good idea to just let your compost pile just sit. And if you're an active grower, you should be using that compost, and you're likely to be running out of compost and needing to be making more all the time. I'm always making compost. No matter what time of the year, I'm always making compost. Let's see, any questions before I move on? I use weeds also to cover the soil and leach nutrients into my soil, but not with seeds in it personally. Uh, okay, so I'm going to get to that. So it's not ideal to have weed seeds in your compost. Will it happen? It can happen, and I'm on both sides of the fence on whether I will use weeds that have gone to seed, and I have, and I will, and I'm going to explain a couple different ways how you can do that and how you can make it to where it's not really affecting your garden. Okay, got you. I have some weeds coming up I have never seen before. It's full of weed seeds. Okay, I'll get to that. I do garbage can composting with air holes at the bottom and around it. It's more like uh, a worm bin at this point. Garbage can composting. Okay, yeah. I mean, garbage can composting. I mean, that works. Whatever type of compost bin that you can use, and it's more ideal with how you just said with composting in a garbage can because it's not connected to the soil in some respects. I'm going to highlight that in some respects. One, because you're not going to get like a bunch of like grass and weeds trying to grow into your compost pile, and now you got weeds growing out of it. Like I have my eco bins here, and there's grass growing out the bottom of the compost. I don't mind it because I know how to handle that, but some people may not like that. And in a garbage can compost or that type of style, you can kind of contain it, and you're not getting weed seeds flying in there. You're not getting weeds coming up from the ground and growing up in there. Now, on the other hand, you're also not going to have as much microorganisms coming from the ground from nature trying to find a way into your compost pile to break that stuff down a lot easier, a lot quicker, and they're not leaving so much of their worm castings, for example. Like worms get in there, they love to break that stuff down, and they leave their worm castings, they leave their poop in there, and that's nutrients for your plants. So you're missing out on some of that aspect. So there's the pros and there's cons to the way that you compost. Uh, that is good. Okay, worms are good, and add worm castings to your compost. I mean, I'm on the fence about that. Yes, you can add castings to your compost. And not only have I bought fertilizer before, I bought worm castings before. I still have it. I've had that for years. The fact that I haven't used it is because I have so many worms in my compost. I'm really an intuitive gardener, and I'm all about keen observation. I'm gardening in a way that nature intends. And I look at my compost bin, and once it stops being such an active compost and it's got through that initial aggressive phase of breaking things down, the worms come in, the microorganisms come in and say, "Ooh, let me eat that up, eat that up, eat that up," and now they can live in that environment. When it's really breaking down, it's really active. It's too hot for a lot of those microorganisms to live and thrive in there. So nature's just the chemical composition has helped break that down between the nitrogen and the carbon, but then the microorganisms come in and start eating that stuff up, leaving their poop behind, a lot of those worms. So there's so many worms in my compost that I don't need to like buy worm castings, and I feel I don't need to add worm castings to my compost or to my soil. Now, I'm not gonna knock on anybody that wants to do that. You can do that if you want, but I like to garden on a budget, and I like to be as low maintenance as possible. So I use what nature provides around me, and my garden is so low maintenance. I'm a lazy gardener, not because I'm lazy, but I want it to be me coming out and gardening when I feel like it. If I miss a few days, if I want to go on vacation for a week, 2 weeks, my garden is going to be fine. I don't have to water it. I don't have to come out and turn anything. I'm on autopilot with my garden. I even have drip irrigation to where I have it on a timer if I need it, and I can put it on whatever timer I want. So if I want it irrigating for an hour once a day, I can do that. Once every 2 days, I can do that, or not at all. But having back to Eden gardening methods, I don't even need the water for the most part. I can leave for a week and my garden will be just fine. Nothing's going to die. Everything's going to thrive. But let's see. Anybody any questions before I move on to the next topic? It's amazing how much the worms eat. For sure, for sure. I do need to get better with turning it. Okay, so I'll get to that. Feed the soil and bin with scraps, and worms will come for sure. I love the drip irrigation on a timer. Definitely, that's been a game changer for me. Sorry about it. It's a lot of bugs out here because I garden with no pesticides. But yeah, the drip irrigation was a game changer for me because I stopped top watering and gardening densely, not too dense, but dense enough. My tomatoes, I was starting to get blight and starting to get fungal issues because I was top watering. So I put sprinklers out that would just water every now and then. You know, I had those on a timer. It would just water during the day, but it was causing some of the tomatoes and things to develop fungus because the water wasn't able to dry. And if you're not thinning out your stuff in a way that will allow a lot of airflow, you're going to have fungal issues. So I stopped with the top watering, and things started to progress. So it's just learning as you go. The drip irrigation I would suggest over sprinkler systems or spraying with the hose. It's just better that way, where just the soil gets wet, and that's just what needs to be moist. The roots need the moisture, not the leaves. The leaves will suck up the moisture through the roots. So just think about that. And it's not, you can find budget drip irrigation systems on Amazon or through different companies. Not gonna mention any specific companies, but yeah, get that drip irrigation. That was a game changer for me. All right, so let's move on to the next thing. I think I mentioned density for the most part. That 3-to-1 rule is just more for less dense material. So when you start to get into material that's harder, thicker, denser, you have to kind of be more intuitive and just think in your mind like, okay, this is a thicker material. It's going to take longer to break down. It's mostly regarding the carbon because let's say, for example, you have watermelon rinds. Okay, you like, okay, the watermelon rinds are this thick. All right, if I put that in there, then I got to put a whole ton of carbon to match that. It's not the same. You kind of just got to think about it. The the green material or the nitrogen, that is not as dense. It may be thicker, but it's not as dense. It's a lot of water retention in there. So what I do, I'll take a shovel or like a knife or something, or scissors even, depending on what the material is, and just cut that up. If it's the nitrogen side, I just cut that up because it's so much water retention in the nitrogen material that it's easy to break that down. So you take a knife or maybe even a meat cleaver if you got a stump of wood or whatever. Just chop up some of that nitrogen, those watermelon rinds, those orange peels, whatever that is that you're putting in there. Uh, squash, the outside of the squash, whatever it is. Just that's not the same as the carbon side because the carbon side is a lot more dense. We're getting into twigs and trees and branches. So that stuff, if you're not able to break it down, you can still put it in a compost, but just know that you're allotted a lot more nitrogen in with that to help break that stuff down because the denser it is, the longer it's going to take to break down also. Like I said, you can put that stuff in there. And what I like to do, I like to just add the nitrogen in over time with that carbon. So if I added in a nice amount of carbon, which, like I said, you don't have to limit necessarily the amount of carbon that you add into your compost, but the amount of nitrogen you do have to limit because it will start to smell. It will start to create this odor that is just unpleasant. And you kind of want to just mesh it in over time where it's like, okay, the carbon broke some of that stuff down. Okay, now you kind of know like what it's doing. You pay attention to your compost bin, and then okay, all right, I know I can add some more. Is those branches or those twigs or those wood chips, are they broken down yet? Okay, they're not fully broken down, and I feel for it. Now I go in, okay, I see like a twig or a branch right there, put it in, and then I go back. I check like in a month, okay, it's starting to break down. The outside is broken down. Okay, now I was like start to like pick at it, touch it, prod it, and okay, it's starting to break down. So I add some more nitrogen, mix that all in real good, and then okay, oh that broke down, like half of that's broken down. So I know okay, add in a little bit more nitrogen, add some more, and I kind of just get more intuitive that way, just paying attention, keen observation, and you'll start to get a feel for how you can garden and how you can compost because it starts to become easier, and it's almost like you just hit a superpower. Like I really know what I'm doing now. Any questions? True. Just dump the castings and holes and keep it moving. Okay. Nature provides its irrigation from above, so that's more natural. Yes, nature will provide its own irrigation, and if you garden in a way that is kind of like mimicking the forest, which is we call it the back to Eden garden method, you will have better results and you will have to do less work and it will become less maintenance. So the more regenerative, the more in tune with growing and mimicking like the forest, the more easier your growing will become. A lot of people just like it's so much work, so much time they're putting into the garden. It just seems like it's not worth it. They're not getting the output versus the energy and time and input and money investment that they're putting into the garden. And I'm like, my money input and time input right now is very minimal now. Before in the beginning, I'm out there every day trying to do this and do that and doing so much and wondering why. It's just like I feel like, oh, this is not worth it. This is not worth it. And my mother even asked me, like she'd come over and like, what do you got growing? Like, I got a couple peppers. That's it. All that time you spend out here, all those videos you're doing, that's it. I'm like, yeah, no, it's going to get better. It's going to get better. But I kept believing. I believed and I paid attention and I worked and I'm starting to really understand now. So once you start to understand it and garden in the way that nature intends, it gets a lot easier. So stick with it. It will get easier. All right, next topic. Break it down. Break it down, break it down, break it down. You want compost, you want nutrients, you want free fertilizer. Everybody wants free fertilizer. Break it down. So break the material down as much as you can. I'm not gonna say put your stuff in a blender. I mean, if you want to do that, that's your prerogative. It'll break down a ton fast if you put it in a blender and then put it in your compost or put it directly in your soil. But you don't need to necessarily do that. But the more finer the material is, the quicker it will break down. So the leaves, which are really thin, so you got leaves right here. It's like razor thin. You got blades of grass. They call them blades of grass because they're so thin. That means they are very fine. They break apart very easily. The grass pulls apart very easily. It will break down quickly. And I keep leaves and grass primarily in my fast compost system, which is my active compost. And I can start a compost pile in the spring, and by summer, I'm using that in the garden again. Make another compost pile or have numerous compost piles of my active and fast compost, which is primarily the stuff that's broken down a lot. And I'm making it in the summer and I'm using it again in the fall. So you can have quick compost bins or quick compost piles that you can use over and over in the same season with stuff that you use from that season. Now my long-term compost bin, which I add wood chips, I add branches, twigs, I don't care. If it comes from nature, I'm putting it in there. If it's organic, I'm putting it in there and I layer that one. So that goes into another topic of layering. There's different ways to compost. You don't have to necessarily compost in a way that's like, okay, I got a 3-to-1 this way, I got a 30-to-1 this way, and you feel like you might be overwhelmed or overcomplicating the process of composting. Once you start to understand that you can add or you should be adding it's like a certain ratio for the most part. We don't have to get too scientific about this. And you can layer your compost. Like, okay, it's layered. I mixed it, added in the nitrogen, and then add some carbon on top of that. Not heavy layers. Don't add like this much carbon and then this much nitrogen or whatever the case may be. Just add, like a nice light layer covered with carbon, and then add a nice layer of nitrogen. Okay, it's going to be more carbon than nitrogen for optimal breakdown. And you just layer it. And I do layer compost on top of or in my long-term compost bin. So I don't turn that one. For the most part, I don't turn it. Like unless I like just dump it in, and I can show myself. I plan to do a demonstration of adding 2 buckets of food scraps into my compost bin before this live is over, and I'll show exactly how I do it. But I layer my compost and I don't touch it again. I'm not coming out here to turn it every day, every couple of days. That's just going to sit there till spring, and I'm throwing it in the garden. But break it down as much as you can for optimal breakdown, for it to break down a lot quicker. All right. Collect extra carbon. So we're going into fall. Make sure anybody have any questions right now. Okay. Do you layer it? Yes, I layer some of my compost. My long-term compost, I layer it. I cut everything into 1 to 2 inch pieces like melons. Yes, cut those up. Paper and wood from fireplace. Yes, use those in your compost. That biochar is amazing. You will see a difference in your plant growth. If you're not getting good plant growth, add some of that biochar. You can add it directly in the soil or add it into a decent amount into your compost and then put that with your plants. You will see a difference. I saw an amazing difference in vibrance and how much my plants grew when I started adding in biochar. All right, that looks it for the most part. All right, so collecting extra carbon. So we're heading into fall right now, and now we're getting into things dying. A lot of the trees are going to be dropping leaves. A lot of the grass is going to be dying off, and all that dead material that you start to see, collect that. And whatever you're not using in your compost right now, I collect it. Once it's dry, I collect it. Collect it. I've been guilty of collecting bags of compost. So the stuff that's outside, I'll put it in bags, put it in my shed. And as far as the cardboard, my wife didn't like the fact that I had a few bags of cardboard just sitting in the basement, just sitting there. I'm like, I'm saving all of this. This is all organic material. This is all fertilizer for my plants. But it does become in a way that you don't want to crowd your house full of it. But I do collect it outside, and it is beneficial when you start to get into more of a spring and summer, when you see just an abundance of green, nitrogen, everything growing around you, everything's looking vibrant, and there's not too much dead stuff. There's not anything dying, everything's living and growing. So it is a good idea to collect a lot of that carbon for when it becomes a nitrogen heavy time of the year, and now you have stuff to just pull out of the those bags and just add it to your compost bin or whatever the case may be. But I don't want to touch on that too long. Okay, weed seeds and compost versus veggie seeds and compost. All right, I'm gonna touch on the veggie seeds first. So veggie seeds, it's not that I purposefully add veggie seeds to my compost, because I don't. I'm not collecting seeds and coming out and just littering seeds in the compost bin. I would do it, but I like to collect seeds and use them and actually put them in my soil blocks and put them out intentionally. Now, I'm not sitting here nitpicking if I miss some seeds, and I'm not nitpicking to make sure I don't not put any tomato seeds in my compost or whatever. If something's bad, I just throw it in the compost. If I got a plant or just something that is like holes in it or ants are eating at it, it got an eggplant, ants are eating at it. It's a watermelon that there's ants and stuff all in it. Sometimes I'll just throw it in the compost, because I know that I will get returns in the spring and the summer in the form of volunteers. Now, sometimes it's something that I don't have a lot of seeds of, and I want to be intentional about where I plant it, and I will collect the seeds. But sometimes, something goes bad in the refrigerator. I don't use it in time. So yes, I'll just throw the whole tomato in the compost, and I get a ton of tomato volunteers, as you saw a little while ago on the top of my compost bin. There's maybe about close to 10 melons and maybe about 100 tomatoes. So I'm no stranger to throwing seeds in my compost. And I went to a compost seminar with Rutgers University before, and I sat through that whole seminar, and I left that seminar saying, wow, I can't get that time back. I feel like that was a complete waste of time. I felt like I should have been the one up there behind that podium doing that seminar, because the lady was telling me stuff that I'm like, okay, I know that. I went to the University of YouTube. I learned that. I didn't learn anything. I didn't learn one thing. And the lady said, don't ever put veggie seeds in your compost. I'm like, okay. I'm a gardener. I didn't speak up. I'm like, I didn't call her out on it, but and try to embarrass her in front of people. But I'm like, why is there an issue with seeds in your compost? Not that you should intentionally put them there, but what's the issue? I get so much food out of volunteers, and the amount of food that I got in pounds from volunteers this year supersedes the amount of food in pounds that I got from food that I intentionally planted. I'll say that again. The volunteers superseded the stuff that was intentionally planted this year in pounds. So I'm getting a lot more food in volunteers. The proof is in the pudding. I'm going to post those videos. I got more videos coming. All these squash that I'm cutting, all these squash I'm taking from the garden superseded all the pounds and peppers and tomatoes and stuff that I got. So, I'm sold on that. But as far as weed seeds in the compost, it's not ideal. No, it's not ideal. But I'm going to explain 2 ways in which I know there are weed seeds in my compost and I still use the compost. Okay, so weed seeds, I'll cut up weeds and sometimes they've gone to seed. I know, okay, I put them on my tarp, for example, and I let the roots dry out, but I know they've gone to seed and I'm not sitting there trying to cut off every little seed or, seed they've gone to flower and I know there's going to be some seeds in there. Why don't I mind? And I still put it in my compost bin. Because if we garden in the way that nature intends, I mulch. Once I like to transplant. Some stuff needs to be directly seeded, but for the most part, I transplant and then I mulch. And then why do I mulch? For numerous reasons. For moisture retention, to suppress weeds from growing, and to protect the soil from degrading. And those are the 3 main reasons why I mulch and mulch so heavily. So I'm not overly concerned with weeds popping up because I'm putting a heavy layer of arborist mulch on top of my soil. So that suppresses those weeds from being able to want to grow up. So that's one way to do it. Another way, which I'm open to, I got to find the right type of material that I'm okay with using. You can put essentially as much weeds and weed seeds as you want in a compost bin and break that down with whatever carbon you're going to break it down with. And then you're going to put that out, do a no dig method, and then cover that up with whatever material you feel comfortable with, and leave it covered. And then when you're ready to plant into it, you just poke a hole or put a little just say poke a hole, and then transplant your veggie into that mixture, and you keep that soil covered the whole time. You might want to put maybe some irrigation under the cover that you're using, and say like you're using like a strip. So I don't know if you can see behind me. Just say like that whole strip behind me right there is all covered. I'm going to go through, and it's a 45 by 6 foot bed, and I might put a whole row, maybe like every foot, for example, I'll transplant a tomato. Every foot I'll transplant tomatoes in this row. The next row, every foot I'll transplant peppers, but I leave that soil or that growing medium covered the whole season. So you don't necessarily need to add a mulch, but because it's covered by whatever your cover is going to be. So that's one way to do it, and you're suppressing the weeds because it can't poke through whatever you're using to cover that bed. I mean, a cheap version, you can do garbage bags, black garbage bags or whatever, but I'm not going to tell you what to use, but you find something that is comfortable for you if you're going to use that method. And there are people that get plenty of success doing that. Next spring, I'm going to try maybe one bed where I'm doing it and I'm keeping it covered the whole season, and I'm just planting where I want things, and it's just going to be very intentional. It may look a lot neater, but I just want to see how much I really like that method by actually doing it. I've seen it done, but I actually want to do it and try it. And I'm only going to do one bed like that and let you know how that works out. Any questions on that? Doesn't look like it. Okay. Drying out the weeds on the tarp. I've already spoken about that. I made a short just recently showing an example of how I dry things out on the tarp. And if you want to see, I can show you. I have some stuff that is broken down already. And you can see that stuff right there. These are weeds that already depleted of moisture. These are ready, everything right here is ready to go into the compost bin. And look at that, leaves layering on top. All that stuff is free fertilizer right there. Look at that. And I love using that tarp because, oh, sorry about that. I love using that tarp. That tarp has allowed me to free up so many weeds from areas where I don't want it at and allow me to convert that into free fertilizer. Yeah, I talked about turning the compost and layering the compost, but I'm gonna touch again on turning the compost. If you want compost that breaks down a lot quicker, it's better to turn it. And I'll show you one of the tools that I use. This right here is my main tool for turning the compost. They have other tools. They maybe have a better tool that I saw at that compost seminar I went to. That was the one thing I took away from that. They have a tool that it'll kind of lay out flat like this. And then when you push it into the compost, like, I'll turn it this way. And when you push it down into the compost, it folds. So it goes in easier. And then when you start to pull it, it opens up. So when you start to pull it, it goes from this and opens up. And then you're able to lift some of the compost. So it makes it a little bit easier to maybe pull from the bottom, all the way from the bottom to up to the top. But I'm good with this pitchfork. And I just feel like I'm a real gardener farmer if I'm using a pitchfork and then have a pitchfork. All right. What's next? Keep it wet. Now, if you want fast compost, you want your compost to break down quickly, it's best to keep it moist. You can come out with your hose or whatever, and I want you to know if you're not turning it, it's hard to know that the water is actually permeating all the way through in your compost pile because especially adding a bunch of leaves, you can start to develop like a layer that makes it kind of hard for the water to kind of seep through. So it's best when you're putting water into it, turn it, add water, turn it some more, add water, turn it some more, add water, because you may think putting you might just put a hose directly in your compost bin and just think it's just going to go all the way down, and it don't necessarily work like that. I've set a hose into compost bin, put it there for 10 minutes, and it didn't even get halfway down in there. It's like getting in some and then running out. So definitely turn it and actually pay attention and know what's actually going on, because when you start to do it correctly, your compost breaks down a lot quicker, way, way, way faster. And it stays hot and active. You put your hand in, like, ooh, I felt that heat. Especially in the winter, you'll see the steam rising from that compost. So you do it correctly, you'll know the difference. Some people like to use thermometers. I have thermometers. I don't care to use it anymore. I know what I'm doing. I play it by eye. So, but yes, keep it wet, more like a sponge, they say. And that's a good rule of thumb. So you kind of like squeeze it. You don't necessarily want to be squeezing out a ton of moisture, but if you get like a little bit, a little drip, that's decent. Um, volunteers, volunteers in the compost. I mean, I don't mind those volunteers sitting on top, like how I showed you a little while ago. Um, that'll happen. If you got weed, if you got seeds in your compost, vegetable seeds, that's going to happen. You'll get volunteers growing up, and I just ignore those. The ones that are sitting on top like that, I'll ignore them. Or if I want them, and I know, okay, it's spring, maybe summerish, I might, lift, go under and get them from the bottom of the root and transplant those into the garden. Now, right now, those are in like the most nutrient-rich environment that you can have. That's why they're thriving. So many of them, so close together, and they're still growing. They're still like so green, and they're amazing. They have a beautiful start, and those are amazing for transplanting. They had the most amazing start that they could have, and you can see some of the true leaves starting to come in. But being that we're in fall, we're going into winter. I'm not going to get any production out of those, so I'm just going to pretend like they're not even there. When I go to mix my compost, I'm just going to mix everything in and just ignore those. Any questions? Now I'm going to show mixing 2 buckets of kitchen scraps into my compost bin, and I'm going to show how I like to kind of just make sure everything is evenly balanced with nitrogen and carbon. Any questions before that? Doesn't look like it. Let me just double check. Let's see, I toss them in the fire pit and we'll collect the biochar. Okay, that's good. Um, can you add weeds to your compost and it won't create more weeds? If you add weeds to your compost, it's likely to create more weeds if you leave your soil exposed. I mean, that's just the truth of the matter. If you leave your soil exposed, you're going to get a lot of weeds. I mean, it's going to happen. That's why I don't like to leave my soil exposed. I like to make some type of mulch, whether it be grass clippings, laying it down, leaves, laying it down. Um, you can even use weeds. So you cut some weeds and lay it around your plants. Lay it all in between your plants that you have there, and you start to add more organic material. It'll die and break down and just be like a natural mulch. You can use straw, you can use hay, you can use, there's a bunch of different things that's just natural organic material that you can use as a mulch. I use the arborist mulch because it's more denser, it's heavier, and I got it for free, and it's just sitting in my backyard. Got 30 dump truck loads for free, and I have an easy mulch right there. So I just use that. For the people that don't have that option, or you have other things at your disposal, just cut some weed seeds, some grass, leaves, whatever you have at your disposal, whatever's um, more abundant at that time of year, you can just lay it around your plants and mulch it like that. Uh, I have to try making and using biochar. I wonder if I can use bamboo for it. I have a lot of that in my yard. I mean, you could burn anything that's organic material if you want biochar. What do you use your, hold on, what do you use for your transplants? Do you make what you grow your seeds in? Do I make what I grow my seeds in? Yes, as far as the growing medium. I mean, as far as my seedlings, the transplants, I'm making soil blocks. So I have soil, I make soil blocks with them, with my soil blocker, and I have seeds. So I harvest seeds. I do buy seeds here and there, but for the most part, I harvest seeds from everything that I grow, and then I continue to progress that. So it's free. Now, if you garden in tune with nature, the regenerative way, gardening like the forest grows, this becomes free. And if you start gardening really all the way how the forest grows, it becomes low maintenance. So it's not only is it free, but it's low maintenance, and it's a no-brainer. So let's see. Of course, okay, she's answering the question for me. Of course you can, but after it burns, collect it. Okay, she answered that. Should I keep my compost closed with a lid or keep it open? Um, if you're going to water it yourself, then I would say you can close it, because now you're not going to get weed seeds and stuff. But if you're not going to water it and you want that rain to get in there, the natural water, then you will leave it open. I keep mine open. I don't want to. I don't like to put too much effort and thought into the way that I grow, into the way that I compost. I mean, I've done the knowledge. I've done the research. I have the knowledge, and I just want to make this process as easy as possible. So I don't cover my compost. So when it snows, the snow is sitting on top. I mean, it is what it is. But because I mulch, I'm not worried about little weed seeds getting in here and there. So I don't cover mine. You can cover yours. You do. Everybody does what works best for them. Okay. Oh yeah, I have done the trash thing, the trash bag thing. It worked well. Do you also use the bamboo in the garden for other things? Making your own trellises. Yes, that's a good idea. I don't have bamboo because I think it's illegal in my town because they are very invasive and they can jump. They have had the history of jumping yards or jumping areas. So you can have bamboo here, but then your neighbor develops down, over in their yard, and then they will get upset with you because they are very aggressive growers, and it's hard to get rid of them. So I don't do the bamboo. But if I did have the bamboo, I would definitely be using it for making trellises or making more enclosures or fencing for protecting it from things like deer. What is the diameter thickness of the bamboo? Okay. Uh, can't you have a quicker compost in 3 months by layering and covering? Yes, you can definitely have quick compost. I was just saying a little while ago, compost, I have compost that I start in the spring and it's ready by summer. I have compost that I'll start in the summer and it's ready by fall. You can definitely have quick compost, but put in stuff that is less dense in material, so like grass and leaves. So I have compost that's just grass and leaves, unless I have weeds that's fully broken down. I run it over my lawnmower, throw everything that's all that fine material in there, and I'm turning it either daily or every other day, and I'm keeping it moist, and it's ready to go in a month, 2 months, 3 months at best, but it breaks down really quick. Okay, you have to keep a handle on it. Okay, all right, so it looks like we're done with the questions for the most part. So now I'm gonna show you how I add in buckets of compost from food scraps into my compost bin. Okay. Sorry about that. See if I get a good view here. Oh, sorry about that. All right. All right. Y'all should be able to see that right there. Okay, so I'm gonna add in one bucket right here. Now, bunch of food scraps, all organic material. I'll collect a bucket or 2 buckets at a time and then add it in. And I'm going to layer that with, I have some carbon sitting here in my bin right here. So I got a bunch of leaves. I'll do leaves first. And then if I need more, I'll add in wood chips. So this is coffee grinds, avocados. So you see a bunch of avocado pits. And this is why there's a lot of avocado pits here. You see that? All these avocado pits here. I have over 20 avocado trees that sprouted this year that I really don't even know what to do with. Thinking about doing like a giveaway or something. But you see all those food scraps I just added in, and now I'm gonna come and add a bunch of these leaves right here. I'm gonna add another bunch. And I just collected this material today, right before this video. And I'll do some light mixing because everything in there is mixed already. You can see some of this compost is pretty much broken down, the stuff that's in there already. And there's a lot of wood chips in there too. So like the wood chip right there, you know, so I can add in, technically I can add in all that nitrogen that I just added and just add it into the mix that I already had here. But there's a lot of leaves around and you don't necessarily have to limit the amount of carbon that you put in there, especially if it's the fine carbon. You don't want to add too much wood chips because it takes longer for that to break down. So yeah, like I got a stick right here. That's fine. It's carbon. It's going to help break stuff down, but this is going to take a long time to break down, which I don't mind. This is my long-term compost, but when it comes time to use this, I'm not going to add this into my garden. I'll sift some of this stuff out, and if it's really dense material that's not broken down at all, I'm going to put that back in my long-term compost bin. So we got some corn husks here, all types of material. We'll just kind of dirty that stuff up. I look at it like dirtying it up because, make sure you can see good. I look at it and I call it like dirtying it up. So I want to make sure all that pre-existing compost kind of like gets in there. And you know it's kind of mixed well when you kind of it kind of looks all like dirty like that. That's kind of how I want stuff. So long as it's not like just in abundance sitting on top, mix it in pretty good. And then what I like to do afterwards, so that the animals don't come eating it, like it's just sitting on top right there. What I do is I finish it off with carbon. So add some more leaves and top it off with a layer of carbon. Now it's been raining for the past couple of days, so all this stuff is still wet and moist. So I don't even need to water it right now. But I top it off with that carbon. It'll help stave back some of these animals, which I don't get much animals in my compost bin. Maybe a couple birds or squirrels, but I don't really get the raccoons, possums, or any of that stuff messing with my compost bin. So I'm good in that area. So I like to top it off with that layer of carbon on top, and that's how I do my long-term compost right there. Done, quick. Does anybody have any questions about how that just went? I've never done a quick compost and was curious. I've seen people with compost turner, container. What is your opinion on those? I mean, I think those are ideal for people that don't have land, that much land. So if you're like more like in a city, you're in an apartment, or you have not too much land to work with, and you don't plan on having much grass and stuff like that, and you're not going to have much compost, then maybe you could use one of those little cute little compact composters. But I have so much compost that I would need maybe like 10 of those. So it's not ideal for me because I'm taking so much that nature has to provide that I would outgrow that composter so quick. And one day it's filled up, and I'm like, what am I doing with the rest of the stuff? Because I have so much that I'm trying to grow, it's not going to be enough, and it's not going to produce enough that that's going to be all I need. So I need bigger compost bins. That's why I like these eco bins that I have here. And I'm about to open up a new one. I have another one that I just pulled out my shed. I mean, if you want to see me put that together, you want me to open that up, and I'll show you how those work. But for somebody that you only produce in a small amount, they're cool, they're easy, they're convenient. Somebody's always going to make a product that somebody needs, or you just think it's cool and convenient, but you don't necessarily need that. Let's see. Any other questions? Thanks for the info. Okay. All right. So what I want to do now is I just want to do like a garden walkthrough. And if anybody has any questions on anything, you can kind of ask me, and I'll show you what I've gotten so far, or that's in there so far as volunteers. So we're gonna do a walkthrough. Let's take this off the tripod here. Get moving around. All right. I appreciate y'all for tuning in, though. This is good. And because they don't allow me to turn the screen around, I don't think I can. Oh, I can. Oh, look at that. Okay. Yeah, this is a better way to do it. All right. So I'm going to my garden enclosure right here. Open this up, and we're gonna start in this aisle right here. So if you see any squash leaves like this right here, that's a volunteer. Any squash that I grew this year were all volunteers. So you can just attribute that to the power of compost. And I just took a squash off here the other day, so it's not any squash on there right now. But we got some basil, some marigolds right here. We got squash right here from a volunteer from the compost. Transplanted that right there. I made this trellis this year off cutting down some black locust trees, and it's growing more squash on this side too. So we got squash coming in there. We got squash coming in over there. And this thing is doing good. All right. So it's coming down this aisle right here. And this was only peppers, tomatoes, and onions in this bed. And it's so much volunteers that I'm like, okay. Oh, look at that right there. We got another squash. I just let them grow. I didn't take them out. Some people like to take out volunteers. I let them do what they do, let nature take its course. We got another butternut squash there. And we got red Russian kale right there, volunteer. More squash plants. We got squash coming in right here. This one looks like, I don't know what's going on with this one. I mean, I'll let it continue to grow, but something funky is going on with this one. Maybe an animal or something started to eat at it. Oh, it came off. So, nature. I'll put this in the compost. And if there's any seeds, that's more volunteers for next year. But it just came off. I don't know. That's the only one that happened to this year. But we got another butternut squash coming in right there. More habaneros coming in. Look at that. All right. And then we got more volunteer squash. Look Look at that. And I just harvested squash the other day, maybe like 2 days ago. More squash right there. Look at these volunteers, more butternut squash coming in. And this is from just putting squash seeds in my compost. You know, I just didn't take them out. More squash, more squash. Look at that. More butternut squash. Lots going on. So at the beginning of this year, this was a till bed. And I'm not tilling anymore, but I tilled, layered a bunch of compost in, and that's kind of what happened. This was a no-dig bed, and I grew potatoes in here, eggplant, there's watermelon, and there's still watermelon in this bed. As you can see, some sugar baby right there. Got some sugar babies over there, more watermelon, sugar babies right there. The groundhogs keep getting in here. They keep eating my sweet potatoes, so you don't really see much sweet potato leaves. Damn groundhogs, man. Some strawberries, eggplant. I just harvested a bunch of stuff, but yeah, I mean, I just mean to show you the power of composting and everything growing so vibrant, and everything's growing a lot better than it did the year before. And that's pretty much what's going on in the backyard. I'm going to release a video where I harvested some glass gem corn. That was good. They are a gem. And I'm going to grow a lot more next year. So as far as being a survival garden, a regenerative garden, those should be an addition. I think, I suggest a lot of people grow, because you can store that for years. The butternut squash, you can have those for a couple years. So if the power grid goes down, no electricity, those are things that will still grow or still keep on the counter or wherever you're storing them. So I appreciate y'all for watching. I'm going to see if anybody has any other questions before I tune out. This was a good live. Okay. Do you place eggshells in your compost? I haven't. I'm not saying I never will, but as of yet, I haven't. I've seen people do it, and some people swear by it. I haven't yet. I have plenty of material that nature is providing for me. So I just kind of more stick to what kind of grows out in nature. So stuff that I know came from the ground, I put back in the ground. I mean, they say you can use the eggshells, make sure they're cleaned out and all that stuff. I mean, I haven't. I'm not gonna tell you not to do it. I just haven't done it, and I don't intend to do it. Whatever nature naturally grows, if it comes from the ground, I'll put it back in the ground. That's my rule of thumb, my general rule of thumb. Any other questions? I appreciate y'all. I appreciate y'all for tuning in. If you got any useful information out of this, like this, please subscribe, share the content, share the channel, and I hope to continue to build this community of regenerative gardeners. Thank y'all, and I'll get another live out to y'all if y'all put any requests as far as like what type of topics you would like to hear me do a live about, or just content that you want me to do videos about. Let me know, and I'll get that out to y'all. Thank you.